Welcome to Divine Decode. I am your host, Pragya, and today we are diving into something we all crave but often overlook, that quiet inner voice that knows the way forward when life feels loud and confusing. Joining us is AmiLynne Carroll, who is an author, TEDx speaker, holistic practice, and creator of the Life Charter program. Babs has spent years helping people quiet the chaos, hear their own divine guidance, and step into freedom and authenticity. Tonight, we'll explore what it really means to hear that still small voice, how to trust it, and how to let it guide us, even when the world around us feels louder than ever. So, first of all, thank you, AmiLynne. Thank you for joining us today, and it's a pleasure to host you.
Pragya, what a pleasure and an honor to be here with you and your audience at the Divine Decode. Thank you.
That is so great. Okay, so I would like to start with this that, when we say the still small voice, that as I mentioned in the intro too, it sounds so simple, it sounds so calming, but, what does it really feel like in day to day life? What impact does that still small voice, what does it have on us? Because I know it's a huge impact that it does. Yeah, can you let us go through it?
Absolutely. And I think it's such a foundational question, whether it's, someone who is new to your podcast listening or someone who has been here since the very beginning, this idea of that inner voice, that still small voice, that intuition, it sounds so inviting, right? It sounds so calming, as you said, and it's as if it could guide us through all of eternity. And yet with the noise, as you've made reference to in your introduction, the noise of the world. And it doesn't matter where we call home, that noise is ever present in our work life, in our play life, in our love relationships, in our parenting, as in our child, us being a child to our parents. There's all of these noise. And I think it's important that we talk about what that noise is, because it is not until we understand what the noise is and where it's coming from that we can truly be able to tune into that still small voice or that intuition or that voice from within. And so for me, when I think about the noise, I think about the expectations, the agenda, the curriculum that society has for us. And whether it's coming to us from our loved ones, our coworkers, the newspaper, the television, the internet, everyone out there has an idea of who we are meant to be and how we should do it best. And that to me is noise because I believe, as spiritual beings having a human experience, we were born with absolutely everything we need to live, to thrive through this experience, uh, you know, from day to day. And so if we can learn to discern, to differentiate between the external noise of loved ones, TV, newspaper, internet, friends, coworkers, bosses, society, and the internal voice of knowing, of experience, of love, when we can learn to discern the difference between those two, then we truly begin our path of decoding why we are here and what we are being called to. So it's all about recognizing that if something is saying, should, I must, if only I would or could, that's external. But if we go back to our divine roots across most all faith backgrounds, there is a common thread. There are multiple common threads, but one common thread that relates to our conversation today is that each of us into this human experience were born perfect, whole, and complete. And we never stray from that divine perfection, that divine wholeness, and that divine completeness. We simply forget about it and cover it up with the expectations that we borrow from society, from our loved ones, from our workers and our children and our parents and our professors. So it's that idea of in the day to day life, it's learning to tune out the external noise of expectation, agenda, and curriculum. And in that same space, learning to bit by bit tune into that original intuition, that original small, still small voice that is always residing within us. But here's the thing, the still small voice doesn't scream for attention. And that's why that external noise is so loud, because the desire there, the goal there is to drown out our inner knowing, our inner intuition, that still small voice. Because ego would say, look, I know that that still small voice isn't going to scream for attention. So we get we get to learn the process of quieting the external, tuning into the internal, and then learning to live out of that place from the internal versus working day after day to meet the expectations of society and those around us and continuing to feel overwhelmed and unable to meet those expectations because we have forgotten that each of us, absolutely every person listening right here, right now, if you don't hear anything else, each of us, when we come to this human experience, we are born divinely perfect, divinely complete, and divinely whole. And that's where we ultimately would like to get back to and operate then on our day to day out from.
That is so, so true. And that is inspiring, actually, And these experiences, they shape our minds and, ourselves, our knowledge about our own selves. And these smaller voices, they are these stepping stones of something bigger. And you've rightly mentioned it too, that it's just everything that compiles up to your spiritual journey, your mental journey. And thank you for giving us that perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's so much like we are all listeners, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously. We not listen because that's how we operate in this world. The key is choosing what or who we listen to and not taking those external agendas, whether it be a TV commercial or an ad on the internet or even an a good-willed, a very good meaning parent or coworker or boss. Their ideas for us, we don't have to think of them as negative, bad, or evil, but we don't have to own them if they're not in alignment with who we are. I use an example oftentimes in this scenario of when we are matriculating through and graduating through, higher education, or we go to high school and then we move on to university or college. One of those examples is when I first went to college, I had a full ride scholarship to an engineering school because that's what my father expected me to be, was an engineer. I didn't want to be an engineer. I had no desire to be an engineer. It was not a space that made me feel productive or useful. And so for that first semester in my university days, I was miserable because I was taking these classes that would lead me on a path that I knew I wasn't called to, but I felt obliged. It felt obligated to follow this path because it was the expectation that my father had given me. When I broke free of that expectation, it was really scary. I didn't want to disappoint my father. None of us want to disappoint our parents or those around us. But it was that very first break in those external expectations that I began then to explore what it was I wanted to do and what I was being called to. And again, it was scary, but now I find myself sitting in a place where I get to do what I love. I get to do it in a way that feeds my soul as I get to feed others. And had I not taken that very first step to break free of the external expectation of someone who loved me dearly, if I hadn't taken that step to break free from that expectation, I very likely today would still be living a life that is very full and busy, but very unfulfilling and exhausting.
I get that. I get that. Also, I truly resonate with the part where you said that, we all are listeners, because yes, all we do is listen, whether it's just the silent with silences sometimes, and whether it's people talking or it's birds chirping, it's just everything that we're listening to and that we're looking at. I get that. I get that. And, that is one thing which is very, very important to, understand and to take in with us, and rightly pointed out that it's up to you what you select and what you choose to hear and what you choose to take away with you. Thank you for giving us that. Listening also comes with this part wherein we listen to ourselves. For example, if I talk about myself, if there is some situation going on, if there's nothing even going on, I constantly talk to myself in my mind. I am constantly in a speech with myself. So what if there is this question that arises sometimes in a lot of people, that what if my inner voice is just wishful thinking and it's not just something which will help me? So how do you help someone trust that and, you know, frame it better?
Yeah, so it's such a great question. And I think each of us at some point in our journey, some of us for long periods at a time, have asked that very question. How do I know what is that divine guidance? How do I know that still small voice or that intuition versus just wishful thinking? And one of the ideas that I share in this space is just the very foundational idea that right where I am, God is. And instead of asking the question, what if it's just wishful thinking? How about if we change the question? What if this is God speaking to me? What if this is the divine speaking through me? Because the what if it's God speaking to me, or what if this is the divine speaking through me, actually takes us on a journey of internal discovery, of internal exploration. What if this is just wishful thinking, is a dead end thought? Because what do we do with that? There's no way to prove or disprove what wishful thinking is. So learn to shift the way you ask questions, the way we ask questions, because I'm just as much a part of this journey as each of you listening, and shift the way we ask those questions and put it into this place of curiosity and discovery and exploration. What if this idea that is coming to me is God speaking to me? Is the still small voice guiding me? What if this is my intuition, which I was born with, guiding my next steps? What would it look like if that were true? Because that then opens up again the door to exploration and discovery versus the idea of saying, what if it's just wishful thinking? Where do we go with that? In my opinion and my experience, there is no place to go from the place of, well, what if it's just wishful thinking? So we reprogram ourselves, we readjust, we realign. It's not reprogramming. We realign ourselves with that divine idea that we already are. And we ask that question in a way that gives us an opportunity to explore and discover and learn, not just more about ourselves, but more about the divine who is guiding us. Because what if that is the voice of God speaking to me, or the idea of God being expressed through me? I call them God whispers, because a God whisper to me is something you have to get quiet and listen for, versus the shouting of this idea of what if it's just wishful thinking? It's like we repeat that question over and over and we get frustrated and confused. We also can become angry and bitter. What if it's just wishful thinking? So learn to rephrase those questions from a place of right where I am, God is. And what if this idea is God speaking to me, God being expressed through me?
That is so, so refreshing. Thank you so much for putting that out in that way because, sometimes we just misinterpret or we just, assume it to be wishful thinking. And thank you for also stating that, not to use it as that, but as signs from God and that wherever you are, God is there and He is guiding you through all of it. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. I think it's really important when we begin talking about getting in touch with our true identity that we understand not who we are, but what we are. And that's a big difference. Not who we are, not a mother, not a sister, not a father or a brother or a coworker or a boss, but what we are. And for me, in this moment, I've settled very comfortably and firmly into the idea that each of us, myself, yourself, each of your listeners in this very moment, are nothing more and nothing less than the expression of the divine. And without us, each of us expressing life, the divine doesn't get to be fully expressed. So when we are trying to live up to the expectations, the obligations, the requirements of that external noise, we aren't able to be the best expression of the divine that we know we can be. And we know the difference because there's a sense of conflict or awkwardness. We may not know what is out of alignment, but we know that something is out of alignment. And that is the call to get quiet and go back and ask that question. What is God trying to tell me? What is the divine speaking through me versus what would my professor have me do, or my boss have me do, or my parent have me do, or my children have me do? Because if we are listening to the divine, and if we are consciously listening, all the noise on the outside of our experience teaches us to almost operate from a place of unconsciousness. We've all driven somewhere and gotten to our destination and kind of looked back and said, I don't remember the drive. That's unconscious living. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is almost autopilot. So when we are thinking thoughts and when we are asking questions, it's important that we know who we are from a place of what we are. And we are but the divine expression. And without us, God, Allah, divine, whatever you call your higher power, without us, that idea cannot be fully expressed.
So true. So true. Also, as you say that, I'd like to ask that, with so much noise around, it's not always possible to, you know, go on with this same thought. Sometimes there are everybody's downs that come with them. So with so much noise, confusion, and uncertainty in the world around us, what keeps you hopeful? What is that one thing that, always keeps you pushing yourself and it just takes you there where you were. And yeah.
I think that for me, the answer to that question, I am learning, varies from day to day. What brings me a sense of peace or a sense of groundedness today may be very different than it will be tomorrow, very different than it was yesterday. And the reason for that is that we live this very excitable life. Society is full of pressure points and talking points and movement, and to feel grounded, to feel that sense of peace, to feel a sense of fulfillment requires us to begin the process, if even very slowly, to spend one moment with quiet. And if that means putting some headphones on, if it means going for a walk, if it means asking someone to come and sit with your young children so that you can have 5 minutes, 6 minutes of time where you can just breathe. Look, we don't have to always be thinking stuff. The human mind says we always have to be thinking stuff. I would say that divine mind does our thinking. And so give yourself the space, especially in those early stages, if you're just trying to figure out how to tune into that still small voice. Give yourself the space of not trying to push away the external noise, because that creates a whole nother activity, pushing it away, but just simply being. And start with 1 minute. I started meditating about 15 years ago. And when they told me to start with 1 minute, I was like, you are out of your ever loving mind. I'm not going to be able to meditate for 1 minute. And it took me 7.5 months to finally get to a place where I could have 1 minute of calm. 7.5 months. But 15 years later, I can now say, for the most part, I'm still a human being, so I still have my downfalls. But for the most part, I'm in command of my thoughts. When something comes in, I decide whether or not I'm going to engage in that thought. And then I'm going to decide how I engage with that thought. But we get to start with one moment of groundedness, of quiet.
That is such powerful reminder, and thank you for that. I'd ask you something that, if someone who is listening right now, who feels lost right now, and yeah, they just want to know where should they start, and what is that one step that you think should be their first priority as their first step? And yeah,
Oh, what a great question. What a great question. For me, the first step is always learning to love ourselves right where we're at. Have we made all the right decisions? Heavens, no. Has anybody? Nope. You're in great company. No one has ever made all the right choices. But learn to love yourself in the place that you find yourself. Because it's not until we love ourselves in the place that we find ourselves that we can then migrate, that we can navigate, that we can transform. And here's the thing, change is one of those things that so many people feel is very scary. But what if I were to tell you that we're not changing? We're simply remembering who we were called to be all along, but forgot along the way. So, that very first step is to give yourself grace that you have made it this far. And you have done so on the wings of angels, no matter how hard your journey has been. And believe you me, listeners, I know that some of you, some of us, man, life has really thrown things at us. But the truth of the matter is you handled it with as much grace as you could in that moment, and you are here for a reason. So continue to learn to love yourself in a more graceful way. Let judgment step aside occasionally and let who you are be exactly perfect in this moment. And then as you begin to think about whose you are, you'll begin to see more clearly why you are here. And that sense of alignment takes care of itself because we begin making choices from this place of not self-acknowledgement from an ego place, but self-acknowledgement from a place of we can do more than we think we can. Don't have to stick with the decision we made 15 years ago. The divine is here to guide us on our next steps if only we will allow that to be true.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights with us, AmiLynne. And listeners, this conversation, it actually reminds us that even in a noisy world around you, there are ways to slow down and listen deeply and find guidance that does not come from outside voices, but from within ourselves, right? Also, yeah, to everyone listening, maybe this is your moment to pause and ask, what is life trying to teach me right now? This is Pragya Malvia, and you've been listening to Divine Decode. Until next time, take a deep breath, trust the process, and keep seeking what feels true to you.
So wonderful to be here with you today and your listeners. And I leave you with one thought. Right where I am, God is. And if that's the only idea that you can hold on to find comfort, to find grounding, to find the way forward in a dark moment, right where I am, God is. I wish you each blessings and gratitude.